Please let me introduce this morning Zach Thomas. Zach was born and raised in Reynoldsburg. And as I told him, I actually spent a little part of my life living in Reynoldsburg, and is a 2007 graduate of Reynoldsburg High School and a 2012 graduate of The Ohio State University, OH. When he was at Ohio State, Zach experienced a major injury that required the services of a chiropractor. And after he received his first adjustments, he knew he wanted to be a chiropractor. He went on to graduate from Life University in Marietta, Georgia in June of 2017 with his Doctor of Chiropractic degree. Dr. Zach has been serving the Central Ohio area ever since, educating people on health, healing, and well-being so they might be able to live with optimal health at each stage of their life. Speaking this morning on the theme release, please join me in welcoming Zach Thomas. Dr. Zach Thomas, sorry.
No, Zach is completely okay. I'm not a big stickler for the doctor title.
About Dr. Z, I think that was another one, right?
Works too. That's what ends up what most people end up calling me anyway. So that works as well. So thank you to everybody for having me this morning. Special thanks to Chris, who's here with us too, because he was the one that kind of got this connection going for us. So thank you, Chris, for that. So I guess just like a little bit of an intro, right? So kind of what I get to do on a daily basis, right? Because I want to kind of put this forward because I think it's going to help everybody just kind of see where the connection may lie between me being a chiropractor and the theme of release, right? Because it's probably not the first person that you would probably think of speaking on the title of release, right? So when I'm out in public and people ask me what I do, I tend to give them this answer, right? Is I help people find more connection with themselves and in their lives, and in that process help them become more resilient, stronger, and more adaptable versions of themselves. And a lot of the times, every once in a while, here and there, help people fall back in love with themselves in that process, right? So that's what I get to do. And I do that through being a chiropractor, being able to serve my community here in Reynoldsburg and throughout Columbus. And before we really get going into everything, I think it's, I'm going to share, I guess, my personal definition of release and kind of how I see it and how I see it kind of fits into our life, right? It's a deeply personal process in which we move through and integrate certain events and experiences in our life, right? So that's kind of the groundwork, and that's kind of the foundation where I want to go with today is off of that definition, right? And David kind of hit on it a little bit when he was talking about that definition as well. Is a lot of times you've asked people about release. You may get something along the lines of, cutting ties from something or letting go of something, right? But I'll offer this to everyone as well, is part of release may be welcoming home a more true, more congruent version of ourselves, right? So not always letting go, but maybe a welcoming of something back to us, a part of us that maybe we have forgotten about at some point, right? So how do we actually get to a point, I guess, of wanting or needing release, a release of some kind, a welcoming back of some kind, right? So at all of us, at some point in our life, right, we're going to come to a point where we are not able to fully process or fully integrate or fully handle an event or experience in our life, right? And the main kind of categories, I guess, if you will, that we can kind of start to break these down into is we have four really main ones, and then an extra one that I kind of throw in there because it makes a lot of sense to me. It may not make sense to everybody, but we're going to put that in kind of at the end as more of an additional piece, right? So we were talking about these four main stressors that all of us have to deal with, right? I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do. You have these stressors in your life in some way, right? And I jokingly with patients on a regular basis, I tell them the only way you're going to get away from this is if you go out into the middle of nowhere out in Wyoming and decide to live under a rock for the rest of your life. You can't, there's literally no way to get away from these, right? So we have physical, mental, emotional, and chemical, right? So those are the big four that I talk about with most people on a regular basis, right? And physical is the easiest one. So we'll start there, right? It's the one that most people are, I guess, easily identify with, right? Because these are the things like the car accident, the big sports injury, something along that line, the accidental slip and fall, anything like that, right? Those are going to be the physical stressors that we have to deal with, right? Next up, the second one I'll talk about is mental, right? Which can kind of come in different forms, right? And all of these can come in different forms. I'm just going to kind of hit on a couple of the bigger forms of these, but all of these have different levels and different ways and kind of different branches that we can go with, right? So mental, what I find a lot of the times with people is the mental side of things becomes more of an unconscious process, right? The biggest mental stress that all of us have to really work through and work on becomes our self-talk, right? The conversations we have with ourselves inside of our own head, which if we're really honest with ourselves, a high majority of the time are negative conversations we have with ourselves, right? If the saying goes, if anybody talked to us the way we talk to ourselves, we probably wouldn't be friends with them, right? But we have to. That is a stressor, right? That is something that we have to deal with every day, right? Next one would be emotional, and a lot of times you'll see mental and emotional kind of clipped together. But I like to separate them because they are able to be on their own, right? So emotional side of things, easiest kind of definition I can give people is the relationships in our life, right? Our spouses, our friends, our kids, all these relationships that we have in our life that we get to be a part of, right? At some point or another can become a stressor, right? And some bigger than others, right? Next one up, number 4 would be chemical, right? This is another one that in my experience, at least, and talking to the people that I get to work with, it's kind of leans more towards where people really aren't quite fully aware of it, right? Because we're talking about chemical, the biggest ones we can start talking about is food, water, and air, right? So the quality of the food that we eat, the quality of the water we consume, but then also the air that we're breathing, right? And in some vein, we have little control over some of that, but we also can control other aspects of it, right? So that can actually become a stressor as well. But then we can also go to things like recreational drugs that actually become more of an abuse, right? That would be a very big chemical stressor, right? So those are really the main 4, right? That we all have to kind of be able to adapt to, right? Kind of take on these experiences and be able to integrate those and process those and handle those and be able to move on with our experience of life, if you will, right? So adding in that 5th one, right? So I told you there was 4 main ones and then kind of like an added one at the end, right? And it's a spiritual stress, right? And like I said, this makes a lot of sense to me and how I view the world and how I view my life. Some people it doesn't. So if it doesn't make sense for you, please, like anything here today, you don't have to take it with you. But spiritual stress to me, those are the big ones, right? And as I was trying to think of good examples, right? What really came to my head, maybe for the easiest example, is if you've ever seen or watched the Tony Robbins documentary on Netflix, where they followed him through one of his programs. Has anybody here watched that? Maybe have an idea of what I'm talking about? I'm having a lot of shaking heads. No. Okay, that's perfectly fine. So it's there. You can go on Netflix, just type in Tony Robbins, it'll come up. And it's basically he allowed full access to one of his week-long events, right? One of, I believe it was his Unleashing the Power Within event. So really quick, just kind of example, kind of what I'm talking about. This woman stands up, and basically what, like a breakout session, she stands up in front of the entire program, which is, you know, a couple thousand people, and is having a one-on-one conversation with Tony Robbins. And she tells him that she grew up in the cult, I believe, known as Children of God, right? So if you've heard of that, you know, a lot of you know, sexual abuse that comes into that, right? And what we have to understand about these spiritual stressors is it hits us on a soul level, right? It's not this physical thing. It is taxing and challenging every fiber of who we believe ourselves to be, right? So for her in that moment and going through that, that is a major stressor that is, you know, impacting not only her, but how she views the world around her and people around her, right? So that's a big one. But then we can kind of come back to a little less extreme version, if you will, if we've all been through these processes of being raised, being educated, being told how to be, who to be, you know, what we're supposed to do in the world, how we're supposed to act, right? But then maybe we come to a point, an event, an experience, somebody, something, someone comes into our life and tells us, hey, maybe that's not true. And there's a rift, right? Within us, right? That would be more of what I would call, you know, these spiritual stressors, right? So those are 5. And again, most of the experiences that we're going to go through may have different pieces of all of these, but there's probably going to be one of them that kind of is kind of rises to the top there, right? So kind of getting into kind of where we go from there, right? So I mentioned, you know, we're all going to get to a point where we may not be able to handle that, right? Well, if we're not able to fully handle that experience, right, it's too much for us. We shy away from it. We kind of shove it down. We kind of try to forget about it. We're just not in a place to fully be with that experience. It's my knowing and my belief that our bodies, our systems are going to hold on to that experience in some way, right? Because also my knowing and belief is that experience has come into our life to teach us something. There's a purpose for that. There is something that we need to learn from that experience, right? So in that regard, we're not going to let that experience go in vain, because it's there to in some way shed some light on something for us and in our life. And until we get to a point where we can release it, we can integrate it, we can move on from that event and experience, in some way it's going to continue cycling and circling back in our life in some way until we decide to deal with it, right? And in that process, right, it can show up as physical discomfort, like in our bodies, anxiety around certain people, certain situations, certain places. And when that starts to happen for us, as time continues to go and as that experience just continues to cycle through for us and shows back up in our life, and if we continue to ignore or not view it or see it in a way that allows us to release it, that will eventually start impacting and changing how we as people perceive the world around us in a very real way, right? How we perceive, interact with the people in our life, right? How we experience our life as a whole, right? Okay, so that then begs the question, right? The next logical place we can go would be, okay, so if I can't process and deal with one of these stressors, these experiences, right? This is what they look like. How the heck do I do it, right? What are some avenues we can go down to actually experience release or integration or moving on from whatever that tie is to that event and experience that's kind of got us stuck, right? I'll start by saying there are a number of ways that you can go about this, right? Number of different things that a number of different people can use and have used that they have experienced a lot of great benefit with, right? I only want to kind of share with you guys and kind of touch on the ones that I have personal experience with and professional experience with. So I'm not going to kind of go off into all these tangents that I don't feel comfortable talking on, because you're not going to get very much out of that, right? So I'm going to kind of stick to my area of expertise here. In my journey thus far, right, I'll be 33 in December. Hands down, the two ways that I've experienced the most profound healing, the most profound release, the most profound, I guess, expansion, if you will, of who I am as a person in this world has come from one, during or after receiving a chiropractic adjustment, and two is journaling, right? So those are the two things that I'm going to kind of touch on here today. We're going to talk about journaling first. It can be a very powerful tool in any regards for anybody, right? But I've noticed for me and my personality and how I work, it is much easier for me to just get my thoughts out of my head and on to paper, because then it allows me to actually process through things, because I can basically, yeah, there we go. David's got one. What I'll call word dump, right? Just drop it all out on the paper, right? But then once doing that, kind of pulling back and giving myself almost like a 30,000 foot view of what I just wrote, right? Trying to pull myself away from whatever the experiences, the emotions, and everything that I just wrote down, and trying to look at it in a way that gives me maybe a little bit more clear understanding of maybe what I might be going through, what might be there, right? How am I perceiving this experience, right? How is it showing up in my life? What can I do different? Where is maybe the lesson here? What's a logical next step, right? Those are the kind of the things that I kind of go through, right? And there's different ways that you can do it, right? I am a huge fan of just, free writing, right? Word dumps, right? Just opening up a journal and just writing whatever is in your head, right? Because a lot of us walk around with a lot of thoughts, a lot of days, and we're thinking about a lot of things, right? Which takes up energy, takes up space, takes up all these things. If you get that out, we can have just a more clear understanding of what's going on, right? But then there's a number of different guided journaling things that you can do, right? Specific companies that make journals that have different prompts, right? So me and my wife have one for our marriage, for our relationship, where we each, in the same journal, it's the same questions that we go through every week. So it's like we're being prompted to answer these questions, right? So that's a way that you can go about it, right? But so I guess for everybody here, it was a journaling and kind of where everybody's at now, what could you possibly just put down on paper, right? To maybe help you start the process of maybe releasing something, right? Or maybe it's just something you've been thinking about, and you just need to get ideas out. Like what's there for you to possibly just get out into journaling, right? Possibly a situation that is happening, has happening, that you just want to kind of work yourself through, right? So that's just kind of the journaling piece, right? And then, kind of moving forward with the adjustment, which is kind of how I actually ended up being in front of you today, right? Was through some experiences that I was blessed to be a part of for some people when they were experiencing some adjustments, right? So I'm not going to really get into the nitty gritty of adjusting. That can be different conversations for people if they really are interested in it. But for me, one of the biggest experiences that I ever had getting adjusted was actually while I was on a mission trip in chiropractic school. I was in the middle of getting adjusted. I was laying face down on a table. My eyes were closed, middle of an adjustment. And all of a sudden, it's just one of those, if you've ever had one of these experiences where you're just kind of sitting with yourself, your eyes closed, and just kind of like a question pops into your head, right? Just something kind of, it's in your head, but it's not really you asking the question, but it's there, right? So as I'm getting adjusted, this question pops in to my head. Why have you waited so long, Zach? And obviously that kind of caught me off guard. I'm like, I'm sitting getting adjusted. I'm like just trying to enjoy that process. And that pops into my head. And I'm just like, I just sat with it for a second. And my natural reaction was, well, waited for what? Right. And then when that came out, I was head to toe completely just overwhelmed with this huge sense of emotion, right? I got very emotional, tears welling up, kind of that kind of weird feeling you get in your stomach. And the next thing I know, I said, I love you, Zach. I love you. And it hit me. I'm 28 years old, getting ready to graduate chiropractic school. And that was the very first time that I actually told myself that I loved myself. 28. And for me in that moment, it was huge. And if you think that's a lot of weight to walk around with, not really saying, I love you. Like how often do we actually tell ourselves that we love ourselves, right? And then from there, waterworks go off. I'm crying even harder, and kind of move forward. And it was just a pivotal moment for me, right, to have that huge release, right? And there's some other really awesome things that I've seen happen that, not from my personal experience, but people that I've actually had the pleasure to adjust, right? So here recently, I've actually started working with a she's moving in to Ohio State this weekend to start her sophomore year. But she has lived with crippling anxiety, right? I think she was telling me for the last 6-7 years, right? Couldn't be in situations that she didn't know what was going to happen, right? Didn't like to be touched unless she knew she was going to be touched, right? From a male, very uncertain when any male would get anywhere near her, to the point where you could see her hands trembling, right? I've been working with her, and she's told me that she hasn't felt as much as herself as she has since that original experience that kind of led to where she was at, since starting chiropractic care. She feels more herself now than she ever has. The ability for her to be in situations where she doesn't feel she's in danger, right? Something as little as, the women in the group can attest to this more than obviously men. She has always been intrigued by yoga, has always wanted to do yoga, but would never go to yoga unless she knew it was 100% women, because she didn't want to be in the same space as men with yoga pants on and the sports bras and things like that, right? But since working with her and helping her, she's going to public yoga events outdoors with men and women and whoever else, right? So that's just another little example here, right? Very powerful things when we're really thinking about it, right? I guess the way that these things can help us, right? Journaling, the adjustment, anything else, right? That helps us release and helps us for me, release and experience, get past something that has been keeping us from experiencing our life at our best, at our fullest, right? It's about becoming more connected with ourselves in some way, right? It's about increasing that connection with ourselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, in any of those ways, coming back and having a bigger connection with ourselves so that we can actually then have the ability, the bandwidth to process these things that are in our life, right? So as far as adjusting goes, right? Just kind of some things to think about, right? That you could just do on your own, right? is just, what might you be holding on to? What little nagging ache, pain, something or other that shows up in your life on a regular basis might be tied to an event or experience you've had, right? How are you connecting with yourself? How are you becoming more connected with yourself on a personal level to help yourself live a more full life, right? And in conclusion, going to wrap it up here. My biggest takeaway for everybody here today, right? It goes along with the biggest thing that I try to help people understand when they're coming into my office for care is getting back to knowing, right, and realizing and remembering that we ourselves are our own biggest source of healing, right, of health, of well-being, right, of growth and evolution, right? It has to come from us, right? We can go to other professionals. We have friends, confidants, people we trust that can help us along the way, right, to help us through our process, to help us get us where we are wanting to go. But at the end of the day, it has to come from us, right? It is in us to be able to heal ourselves, right? We are the key to unlock the shackles that potentially are holding us back from experiencing a life with more peace, more ease, and more connection. Thank you.
Wow. So thank you, Zach. First of all, boy, I hardly know where to begin. So many profound and insightful observations, and I think, Rod, I was thinking the exact same thing. I was thinking of Marcus Aurelius, right? What doesn't kill you can make you stronger. So I hardly know where to begin. And so if you have questions or observations, please write those in the chat. I'd like to start first with, you really got me thinking about loving oneself in a very different way. Because when you first said that, the first note I made to myself here was, well, we're talking about narcissism, aren't we? Narcissism is sort of, overweening love of the self. And then Amy wrote this really, really interesting word, I think, in the chat, self-compassion. Amy, would you mind sort of expanding on that? Because I just love that term. It's so much more generous than narcissism.
Well, I talk about self-talk in my skincare business too. I talk about the importance of when you're putting something topical on your skin, it's not just the thing that's going into the skin, it's what you're saying to yourself as you're delivering it to yourself. And so I consider that a form of self-compassion. So it's noticing the things that are coming up in your, I call my notebooks brain dumps, but similar to Zach. Notice the things that are coming up in those words and in your brain, but also have the compassion to say, yeah, I'm not really comfortable with this, that this is what's coming up for me over and over again, but trust that with the right support, you're going to move into something more toward health.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
So building off that, Zach, do you see that as, well, is that the ultimate goal of your work as a chiropractor, to help your patients to love themselves, to have this kind of self-compassion? Is that the ultimate goal, or?
Yeah, that is right. And how I view chiropractic and how I like to practice, because that is what it did for me. Right. That is what I feel very blessed to do what I'm doing. I feel very blessed to be able to have gone through what I did, because chiropractic was an avenue for me to get a better understanding of who I was as a person, how I fit into this world, and what I can do for others. Right. So yes, the overarching theme of anybody that I'm working with, even if it's unsaid, right? Even if we never talk about it, or we talk about it sparingly, right? I know in the back of my mind that I'm trying to help this person come back to the realization that they are able to love themselves and that they are able to experience life at a really, really high level, right? And it doesn't have to be all hard and struggle, right? And to help people kind of find these different lenses and these different views to look at what's going on in their life, to where it's not always the oh, this happened to me, and well, then this happened, and then I have no control, right? It was like, well, helping them realize, well, actually, you have a lot more control than you know, right? And with that control, with that guidance, with that knowing that they have the ability to be healthier, to be well, right? To maybe live their life the way that they've always envisioned themselves living it, but has never been given the okay to do so, right? That's what I'm helping. That's what I really love about what I do, is helping people kind of get back to that place.
Well, as I said, Zach, profound and insightful, and it's got me thinking in ways I hadn't thought before, which is what I always, this is the reason I come to Creative Mornings Columbus, was exactly that sort of experience. I want to be mindful of the time because I know you have to start seeing patients here soon. So we want to give them the benefit of your wisdom and expertise. So once again, our thanks to Zach Thomas.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Zach Thomas.